Hello and welcome to this recording of the Sewing and Papercrafting Tool School. I'm Dan Cunningham. I'm one of the engineers here at Fiskars. I've been here about 15 years. And these tool schools are designed to educate essentially everyone on the workings of our products. The different tool schools we have are generally organized by category. This one is, like I mentioned, sewing and paper crafting, but I have one for gardening, I have one for hardware, I have one for kids and other things. Generally, they are all about the same, about an hour, and they start at a very high level where we talk about the different categories of tools, how to assign different tools, different categories within a entire group. So we start with that. Then we dig a little deeper, where we dive into a more in-depth look at how the tools work, what makes them tick, what makes one tool work better than another in a certain situation. And then after that, we often look at cool tools. Those are the tools that might not fit within certain categories, or they might be new, or they might be unique, or maybe rarer, but they often help to reinforce the learnings that you had in the first sections. This particular tool school is covering both essentially all sewing and quilting tools, as well as a lot of the paper crafting tools. This is a pretty significant part of Fiskars' market in the US. Additionally, this tool school is going to cover almost exclusively US products. Now, these might be products that are also sold in Europe, but in general, this is a US audience for US consumers, and that's where I'm coming from. A little history on tool schools. We created the first tool schools before I was even here, and they were engineer to engineer. The idea was they are there to educate the inner workings. But we started to understand that consumers are often confused about the way our products work, and it might be helpful to educate them. So we created a new version that was more consumer friendly, and I started presenting those about 10 years ago. We presented to the Flower Garden Expo. We started doing live streams and recordings with Michaels.com. And an important asset additionally is when we can educate our retailers, so our customers. Retailers often have some experience with our tools, but they often don't have the depth of knowledge that our salespeople do. And me as an engineer, I can educate things that maybe even the salespeople don't know. So I'm happy to educate everyone, including those. So without further ado, this is, like I mentioned, the Sewing and Quilting and Paper Crafting Tool School. And as I mentioned, we're going to start really high level. So at the highest level, if you look at kind of within sewing and paper crafting, I can group all of the products essentially into two things based on their function, their primary function. Firstly, it might be a cutting tool. Now, these are the things that Fiskars are best known for, mainly because of the orange-handled scissors. We're really well known for that. But there's a wide variety of cutting tools. Really, cutting tools takes up about 80% of the sales dollars of all of the Fiskars within sewing and paper crafting. But within that 80%, half of it is scissors. So we've got half being scissors. The rest are split between rotary cutters. 20% of that is rotary cutters. These are those razor-sharp pizza cutters that we'll talk about in a little more detail later on. There are trimmers. They're primarily paper crafting, but there's also an option for some fabric cutting trimmers. We're no longer as kind of elaborately apportioned as we used to in the early 2000s, where paper crafting was this huge hobby. We have a limited supply of those types of trimmers, but we'll still talk about them. They still take up about 15%. And then we have knives, whether they're snap-off or craft knives. We'll talk about those well, and they're another 10%. Now, other than the 80% of cutting tools, the other 20% are mostly measuring tools. So anytime you're doing a paper craft task or a sewing task, most of the time you need to measure things as well. So within measuring tools, most of it is rulers. So quilting rulers, paper crafting rulers, in a small way, like kids' rulers, That's about 80% of that measuring category. And the other portion is cutting mats. So we call these cutting mats. These are really just surface protectors. A lot of people use them just as a nice work surface to protect the table that you're on. In fact, you can see I'm using a work surface here, and I'm going to be placing all of my tools on here, but we'll definitely get into kind of more about those cutting mats at a later time. So starting with cutting, we will start with digging deeper into the inner workings of our most popular product in these categories, and that is scissors. Very well known for our scissors. Since the 60s, 70s, these have been essentially the pinnacle of affordable scissors. Prior to that, all scissors were heavy, forged, expensive, but along came plastic handles, which brought the idea of a quality scissor down to the masses. Really, scissors are Stone Age tools, though. They're very simple, essentially. There's 3 parts. There are blades, the metal things that you do the cutting with. There's a joint, that's the part that holds the metal together, and then there's handles. Now, those are the part you're interacting with. But what always appears simple on the surface usually has complexity underneath, and the same thing is here. Within each of those 3 things that are making up a scissor, we can vary all of those things. We can take blades that are thicker, thinner, wider, harder, sharper, different materials. We can take a joint that is plastic and less expensive, or maybe an all-metal joint, one that you can take apart, or one that stays permanent. You can have handles that are right-handed only, left-handed only, ambidextrous, made of metal, made of plastic, different textures, different colors and decorations. All of those things can go into making a scissor. Now, why would we have so many types of scissors? It's one of the first questions I get from either new marketers or customers or buyers that are saying, why do you have so many SKUs? Well, in engineering, often we are always reaching for better performance. But the trouble is, better performance at the same cost, almost always it comes at some sort of other cost. In most of the time, what we do is we make the performance better by reducing the breadth of what that scissor can do, by making it more specific. So you can have a pair of scissors that's a good universal scissor. It's great at a lot of things. And in fact, I would say our orange-handled scissors are that. They are a nice universal scissor that can cut fabric, can cut paper, can even cut packaging open, plastic, and live to tell the tale. The trouble is, if you have really, say, fine fabrics or high-quality things or tough materials, leathers, this might not be the best scissor for it. You might have other options that do a better job of that. And even if they're at a similar cost, it comes at the intangible cost of maybe doing those other things poorly. So if you have a fabric scissor, it might not be very good at cutting plastics or papers, or if you have a good cutting paper scissor, you might not be great at cutting fabrics. So us as engineers, we can pick and choose the features from those lists above, the best joint for a task, the best blade for a task, the best handles for a task, and get a scissor that is better performing at essentially the same cost, but over a smaller specialization. So we still have the breadth of all of the different scissors because we want to cover all the tasks, but we have specific scissors that are great at certain things. So I'm going to start talking about the variety of scissors based on some of those tasks, some of those specific things that consumers need. I'm going to format this, and it's going to start with a task. We're going to explain why this might be a challenge to people, and then I'm going to show an example of a pair of scissors that excels at that task. So we're going to start with a difficult material to cut. Say, in this case, it might be a felt, and you're talking about the problem that happens when that material folds over. Now, let me show what I'm talking about. So in front of me here, I have a little bit of this fabric. This is felt. It's pretty straightforward, simple felt. Let me zoom in a little bit. If I take a standard scissor, so this is a very I wouldn't call it OPP, but this is kind of one of our more versatile scissors that's not specific to anything. If I try to cut a felt with this pair of scissors, I'm probably pretty successful for the first layer. Maybe not all the way to tip. In this case, this works all the way to the tip because our scissors are pretty nice. But as soon as you start trying to cut more than one layer, now what happens is that material folds in between the blades. You can see that happening. The material is not getting cut, it's just folding. And that's just 2 layers. What's happening is the blades themselves, these have a certain thickness and a certain sharpness that when you put too much material, difficult to cut stuff in, it actually spreads the blades apart. That might be because they're a little more flexible, or they have a little less what we call camber. Camber is a property of these blades. They're actually curved towards each other. They're not perfectly flat, they're curved. But that camber might not be enough for this task. So flipping back to this material fold over problem, again, some of these causes might be it's too many layers. Can you do it 1 layer at a time? If you can, then maybe that's the solution. Could it be that the beam strength is not as strong? The blades of the kind of more universal scissors tend to be thinner so that they can be more cost effective as well as a little bit lighter. I mentioned the camber. And then the other thing is it might be the joint. So the joint itself might not be constructed as robustly because it's got to cut through everything. So for instance, if this joint has a plastic on this side and a metal on this side, then as the material is trying to push the 2 blades apart, it might stretch the plastic a little bit. Not permanently deforming it, just kind of giving it a little bit of stretch. So we do have a set of all metal joints. So other scissors that we have that are designed a little more robustly have all metal joints that have metal on both sides. And that will prevent that stretching. Now, as engineers, we like to do things over the top a little bit. And so we want to design scissors that'll do a really good job of solving this fold over issue. So we've introduced a scissor called the Amplify shears. This has a built-in technology inside it that allows you to cut through multiple layers without any issues. So if I dig through here and find myself an Amplify, this is an Amplify set of scissors. You can tell it has an interesting thing going on here in the joint. I'll get into the detail in just a second. But what it lets you do is cut through all the way to the tip, really with no problems. And here I'm just looking at the single layer, but you saw the other one had trouble with a double layer. Here, double layer is no problem. Hey, let's see if we can do 4 layers. So I'm going to cut right through 4 layers with, and I can do a lot more than that. But the Amplify works by using a special patented mechanism in here that when these blades detect high force, like they're about to get splayed open, the top blade will actually microscopically twist in its set. So it's actually loose in this joint. You don't feel it because it's nice and secure, but microscopically it'll twist. That twisting means it's pointed toward the other blade. It's adding to the pinch. And by doing that, it allows you to cut through ridiculous numbers of layers. So the story I tell, we have a test material in our test lab. It is a test cloth. And most of our scissors can come off the line cutting multiple layers of this cloth. Some of the lower end ones maybe only do 1 or 2 layers, but our orange-handled scissor can do 4 layers. Well, when we went and we're developing the Amplify, we were hitting the barrier of 16 layers, 17 layers, and getting ridiculous how many layers this could cut, and there wouldn't be a problem. It would still cut right through. It was to the point where you didn't have enough hand strength to squeeze through. It was just ridiculous, but the scissors would do it. So it's a really cool solution, and it comes in 2 different sizes. I'll flip back to here. You can see the sewing has 2 different sizes, a 10-inch and an 8-inch, and then Papercrafting has an 8-inch There are other versions that have lived over the years. There's been a 5-inch version, but these are kind of the main ones that are out there now. So Amplify scissors, patented, great, expensive a little bit, but really worth it when you're having these difficult to cut materials. So another task that might be about difficult to cut materials, but instead of scissors failing to cut, maybe it's just a rough cut. Maybe it's, maybe gotten a little dull. The blades have gotten dull. Why have they gotten dull? It's not perfectly clean. And usually it's because the blade is somehow damaged. And the reason the blades might be damaged is because they have a sharpened edge to them. Every scissor has a sharpened edge. Even our kid scissors have a sharpened edge. In fact, that sharpened edge is ground at an angle to this flat. So if you imagine if it's a perpendicular line, it would be a 0 angle. If you increase the angle a little bit, it might be a 5-degree angle. And that's about where our kid scissors are, about a 5-degree angle. Now, flipping back to here, our typical pair of scissors has a standard angle of about 30 degrees. So both blades are ground at a 30-degree angle down from perpendicular. So that 30 degrees is, we've discovered, approximately the right amount for a durable cut. It's something that can cut a large variety of materials, and it can do so over a long period of time. So you can have it for 1,000 cuts, 5,000 cuts, 10,000 cuts. And that 30-degree angle will do a good job of staying sharp and still performing nicely. But there are some materials, especially on the fabric side, that you want something even sharper. And so we do have another grind angle. It's a very sharp angle. It's 45 degrees. It's not quite like razor blade sharp, but we call it a razor edge. And I'll get to the details in a second. But yeah, that's a 45-degree angle. And that allows you to have something that cuts all material, even the fine materials, chiffons and laces and things. It'll cut it very cleanly, very nicely, without having any problems. The problem with that, we have these razor edge scissors, and you can see that down in the bottom. And actually, if I zoom in, it's a little hard to see, but under our logo on all of our razor edge scissors actually say razor edge right on there. And that is an indication that these have this extra sharp grind angle. Almost always they are exclusive to sewing scissors. We even do a little bit of color coordination. We have orange soft grip on the white scissor. So for instance, this is a sewing razor edge. This has orange soft grip on a white scissor. And the reason we do that is so you can tell this is my fabric scissor. If I use it on paper, that 45-degree angle might wear out faster. So again, we've now taken the performance idea and made it more specific to just fabrics. So it can do a really good job at cutting fabrics, but if you try and cut paper with it, it might wear out faster. So thus, you've heard about, my grandmother did it too. Don't touch my fabric scissors. These are not for paper, it's fabric only. It's because that extra sharp edge can wear out faster when you cut paper. So we have these two versions, and usually in sewing and quilting, you have these razor edge scissors, and when you have paper crafting or universal scissors, they are the standard. So you can see under the logo it says razor edge. Now we follow this through with, yes, these 30-degree angles exist because they are a more universal grind angle. They're good for a lot of different things. We take that even a little bit of a step further when we make all-purpose scissors, more these universal scissors. We made them even universal handles. So we have some handles that aren't quite the same. They're more straight in line versus bent. We'll get into detail on that just in a bit, but the idea is they're straight in line, so they're more universal. So you can cut up in the air, cut out packages, cut open kitchen packaging. You can use it to cut paper and fabrics and things. But these are kind of that universal, and they use that more standard edge. We don't call it anything other than we don't call it not razor edge. It's just not razor edge. So these are kind of that more universal scissor. Okay. Another task that's related to these scissors that are not that razor edge idea, it's another difficult to cut materials, and now it's tough. And it's not tough because the scissor can't do it necessarily. It's because it takes too much hand strength. So the force is too high. Often the cause of something having the force being too high is because sometimes the joint is too tight. So the opposite of having a loose joint, which makes it open and close easier, but also makes the blades splay, if you remember, that no folding in between. You want to tighten the joint, but if you make it too tight, it becomes harder to squeeze. It could be that you're cutting too much or cutting too thick. Now, an option here with a tough material that is too hard to cut has to do with the blade length. And this is kind of an interesting one most people don't think about. But imagine you have this scissor. This is not a Fiskars. I know, blasphemy. But this is a paper scissor. This is a 14-inch long pair of scissors. It's ridiculously long. Okay, let me go to a zoom like this. So this is ridiculous 14-inch scissor. This is intended for cutting newsprint. So we're going to cut, say, one layer of paper. And I can show you, yes, I can cut one layer of paper, but if I get to the tip, I can't actually even cut all the way to the tip. It gets really tough. And that has to do with the amount of leverage you're gaining out of these really long blades. Your hands they have a decent amount of leverage, but way at the tip, you cannot translate your force into much force at the tip because they're so far away from the pivot. We do talk more about leverage in the garden cutting tool school, which you can also find, but we're not going to talk much here, but just understand these have really bad leverage. A pair of forged scissors, or our orange-handled scissor, they've got a reasonable amount of leverage. If you can imagine, your handles are here. They're this far away, and the blades are about the same length as the handle. So you're always squeezing with about the same amount of force as that's happening at the tip as what you're squeezing with your hand. But there are difficult to cut materials that might still not be enough. I've heard the story about Ginger. So Ginger is kind of a more industrial arm of Fiskars Tools. They're their own entity, but they are part of the Fiskars family. They specialize in forged scissors, more for an industrial customer. So you see a lot of leather cutting, fabric factories use Ginger. I heard the story of a leatherworking factory that was still having trouble cutting through with their Gingers. The scissors were working fine, but the hand strength of the people were getting tired. And so Ginger developed a new pair of scissors that essentially moved the pivot towards the tip. So it made the blade a little shorter, but by making the blade shorter and the handle longer, you've given a significant amount more leverage. So now when you squeeze with, say, 5 pounds, instead of having 5 pounds of force at the tip, you now have 10 pounds of force at the tip. So it was giving them significantly more force based on that same, but at the cost of losing a little cut length. It was fine with them, but that was where we were able to use Ginger expertise and understanding of that leverage to make a higher performing tool for that specific task. So what I'm getting to is sometimes shorter bladed scissors give you more power. And I will point out for now a sneak peek. This pair of scissors is a package opening scissor, and it's got long handles and a short blade. And I'll get into more detail later, but understand this gives you a significant more leverage to cut through things like packaging. So we'll get back to that in the cool tools section, but understand shorter blades sometimes give you more leverage. Well, as engineers, we want to do better than that. Can we come up with something that gives you more power without giving you less cut length? And it turns out we can. And we've developed a pair of scissors technology that's called PowerCut. And there's actually 2 different sizes of PowerCut scissors and a spring-loaded one. You can see all 3 of them there along the right. And all of them have these funny shaped blades. So these blades are bow-shaped. They have curves, they're almost bunny ear style when you open them up. These bow-shaped blades enable you to cut all the way to the tip with up to twice as much power. And I can demonstrate this. This is a really heavy chipboard, cardboard, solid. It's not a corrugate, it's solid. So a regular pair of orange-handled scissors like this, I do not have the physical strength to cut all the way through. I can only get about halfway through because it's so difficult. So if I take the same size scissor, so this is an 8-inch scissor, it's got the same size handles, same size blades, but then I cut here, I can cut all the way to the tip with significantly less effort. And the way that works happens based on the chart right above me here. So starting at the beginning of your cut, when your blades are wide open, it's very easy to cut. You have a lot of leverage. It's very close to the pivot where you're cutting. And then as you're closing the blades, you move down this chart, the blue line up there starts increasing. The blue line is a typical pair of scissors. That cut force requirement increases because you're moving forward, you're losing leverage, and one other reason, the blade cutting speed, the speed that the cut point is moving forward, is increasing. Because if you think a large angle, the place that they intersect moves really slowly. But then as you get closer to closed, that point goes zip, and it zips towards the tip, and you get a significant bump up of the amount of force it takes, especially towards the tip. What we did as a trick here with the Amplify scissor, by making these power cut scissors, by making these bow-shaped blades, we've slowed down the cutting at the tip. So by slowing it down, it does still give you less leverage, we can't help that, but you can get a slower speed, so it requires less force to cut through. So that's where these come in. And you can do it with, this is an 8-inch scissor, we've got a 9-inch scissor, and we've got this snip that has a little bit less significant curvature to the blade, so it's not quite as good. It's not quite twice as much power at the tip, but it's still more. And all of those things can help you to get more power to cut through those tough materials. So we do have a patent on that one too. In fact, my name's on it because I'm happy to have invented it. So, yeah, very, very cool. So when you really are cutting these tough materials, the power cut snips or shears can get that job done. It might not take all of your force to cut through something with a typical pair of scissors, but if you've ever done a lot of somewhat difficult cutting over a long period of time, you get tired. Your arms and muscles start to get sore. And especially for those with arthritis, arthritis is the weakening of muscles, they start to get sore and wear out faster. The reason, one of the big reasons for wearing out your muscles at a certain force is because you're using two sets of muscles. One muscle is to close the scissor. Closing that scissor here, let me zoom in here. Closing that scissor is your hand closing up. And that actually uses all of this musculature. Big, heavy, strong muscles, grip muscles. That gives you a lot of strength. But a lot of scissors then require you to open your hand up. That opening is weak muscles. They're the ones in the front here. And one of the characteristics of arthritis is that your musculature, your strength reduces, especially on weak muscles. So what we can do is create a pair of scissors or a set of scissors that takes away the need for you to use your weak muscles. And these are called easy action scissors. Now we apply them to a variety of different scissors, and one I hinted at here, the power cut snips already had it, but all of these include a spring. They become spring loaded. And if you think about a scissor that has a spring in it, now you don't need to use your muscles to reopen. In fact, the scissors open it for you. They open your hand for you. You don't have to use those weak muscles. You're only using your strong muscles. So using those strong muscles let you go for longer without tiring because you don't have to use the weak muscles. The other addition that comes with using a spring, and it's most obvious here with this one, is you don't need finger loops. Those finger loops require you to put your fingers in And they're there so that you can push your hand open and it'll push the scissor open. If you don't have the need for finger loops, you can find more comfortable ways to hold. You don't have to hold with the tips of your fingers. You can hold at different places with different grips, which different grips mean you can shift that grip during use. You can give certain muscles relief. So having the lack of loops there is very helpful also. So especially people with arthritis with weak, and they often have knuckles that are losing joint flexibility. If you have to slide your fingers into those loops, sometimes that can be a bother. So again, having these no loops are really helpful for everyone, not just for people with arthritis, but especially for those with arthritis. Okay, so that's a lot of different scissors. There's a few others that I will get to later in the cool tools sections, but a few others I want to point out. They come in different sizes. Our smallest scissors are 5-inch. This is a 5-inch razor edge scissor. I can zoom in here. Boop. This 5-inch razor edge scissor is not new, but it's newly available again. It was developed the same time as those other razor edge, but it's just going into Michael's, which will be great. But this is a pair of scissors that you don't fully insert your fingers into to hold, whether you're doing it 3 fingers this way, 3 fingers this way. These are just fingertips. So you put 2 in, because this is not something you're going to cut long lengths with. This is going to be short snips, short snip, things like that. Similarly, of course, we have a spring action version of that scissor as well. So this is the 5-inch snip that includes a spring. So easy action right in there with that. And then finally, there are pinking shears. So pinking shears are a pair of scissors that have a zigzag cutting. And if you've ever cut fabric and wanted to prevent fraying, that zigzag cut will help you to prevent that fraying. So variety of scissors there, but yeah, we'll get to a few more at the end. So next we're going to talk about, and slide some of these, the other percent. So again, this 50% of cutting is scissors, but a significant portion are still trimmers. Trimmers are like scissors in that they're actually relatively simple when you break them down into what their functions are. But you know, they all have a blade, they have a platform that you put the material to cut on, and then they have a clamp most of the time. So just like scissors, we can vary all of those things. We can put different kinds of blades, different kinds and sizes of platforms, different kinds of clamps to hold the material. And by mixing and matching, we can do different trimmers for different tasks. So looking specifically now at the blades, there are 4 primary different types of blades that we use on our trimmers. The first is what we call a bypass style, or often known as a guillotine. This is the typical trimmer that you'd think of when you think of a paper office. You know, it's just got a large blade that just slices. This is a really pretty high capacity tool. We say it can cut up to 15 sheets. There is a downside to it though. It's always cutting from an edge all the way through. So it's great, and it's often in our kind of lower cost, not always lowest cost, but lower cost versions, because it's very straightforward and it's very familiar to everyone. There's a more common, a little less common style. We call it style F when you look at replacement blades. This is a circular blade, a rotary blade. I can zoom here. This rotary blade version has a circular disc style blade in here that when you flip it down and push down on the blade, it slides against a sacrificial plate underneath here. And that blade will cut through the material that you're cutting. What's unique about this style, this rotary style blade, is it can cut fabric. So because it's a really sharp blade in there, it can cut through a fabric pretty nicely. It probably can do maybe 1 slice of fabric, maybe 2 layers of fabric, but it can still do it in a pinch. It does have a limit on the capacity of the paper sheets. We really say it only can cut about 6 layers of paper at a time, but it does have the kind of that advantage of being a little more universal. The third type, and honestly the most popular because it can be in the least expensive, is what we call, internally we call it PBT, It's personal paper trimmer, so it's kind of like paper trimmer blade. But anyway, it styles G and I, and it's a very small triangular blade. And we have a variety of those. And these have this carriage. So this small blade actually is occupying this carriage. And it's kind of hard to see because it's so small, but just a little triangular blade that put into the guide will slide back and forth and cut through that material via a groove that's under here. So there's nothing that you're cutting into on the plastic, but you are cutting into this groove. It does have some interesting features. We say it can cut 10 sheets of paper at a time. Two trademarks that we talk about are triple track. That's a previously patented design of the way that this carriage is being held in the track to make sure it's lined right up and it doesn't wiggle or move around. So that's the triple track. And then the more important thing that is very interesting is the sure cut. And this is going to be really hard to see unless you're in person, but there is a thin metal wire that runs right along the cut line that when you place the material inside the paper or whatever it is, that wire becomes visible right on there, and the blade tracks perfectly along that wire. So it's a way to preview where it's going to cut. Very few, I don't think there's any competitors that have anything like that, but it's super useful when it comes to doing trimming of paper that already has something printed or a pattern on it, or just marks that you want to know exactly where it is. So that's the third version. And the last version is kind of the big daddy, the granddaddy of all of these. It's a rotary bypass. It's kind of like a hybrid, but it is a blade. Let's switch over to here. Actually, make it big. It has a blade built into it that is circular. Kind of hard to see, but you can see it. A circular blade, but it's actually pressed against a metal rail, like the guillotine or the bypass. By doing so, it can cut significantly more material, either tougher material or more layers of material. And it does that because it's spinning, but it's also pressed against the metal thing. So it's slicing it right off. So it does a really good job. In fact, I've got some tough material. This is a chipboard. It's not quite as thick as that other one I cut with a power cut. Basically, nothing else can cut that. But if I were to take this material and cut with here, this works. It's tough, but it gives a super clean edge, cuts it right off. No other paper trimmer would be able to do something like this. This is the what we call the rotary bypass, or we call it the precision. So there are some other features of the platforms which might be kind of cool. You can see there's a range. There's always a range of sizes. Some of them are very small. Some of them even fit into a 3-ring binder. This one has holes for a 3-ring binder, so you can have it in a packet for you to use in multiple places. Many of them have a swing-out arm. So they're only so wide, but sometimes your paper you want to measure off the edge. So it has a swing out arm with measurements built right into it. So you can look and see how much you're leaving versus how much you're cutting off. And then a new one actually includes both a swing out arm. So this has the swing out arm. And this also includes a storage door. Flip to this overhead. This storage door rotates out and it can store extra blades. You can store scissors. You can store pins or materials or whatever you want to do. And it closes locked in place. So that's a super handy one. And this uses that PPT style of the blade, the small triangular blade. So if you're using, say, a scoring blade, in sometimes you can store the scoring blade in there as well. So those are some different varieties of the platform features. When we look at kind of our portfolio, we do have all 4 types. I mentioned that the rotary, the round one that cuts fabric, we have the fewest number of those. We really have the most number of the style G or I, the PPT. They are often the lesser expensive versions. And then we have 2 versions of that rotary bypass, or the precision. One that is big and actually has a fold-out platform. So it's a great big platform to work on, but it's still relatively transportable, or another one that has just an arm that comes out. So those are some interesting rotary cutters, or sorry, interesting trimmers. Now, there is a different one. I've only mentioned one so far that cuts fabric, but there is an additional unique one that the story goes was made in the late 90s, was made for a few years and then discontinued. But due to popular demand, it actually came back. It's the only product that I'm aware of, correct me if I'm wrong, anyone out there, that basically came back due to popular demand. And this was called the rotary cutter ruler. So it's a combination of a rotary cutter and a ruler. Now, I know we haven't talked about rotary cutters yet, but it's very similar to that rotary style blade. But this one is a much larger set. So this is a flexible thing, and this doesn't have a base. This is not like a paper thing, a clamp that flips over. In fact, this is more like a rotary cutter attached to the side of one of these big rulers. So it's movable. You can move it over material. You can line it up along this right edge of the metal line. And then when you push down and slide, it just makes a cut very simply, very straightforward. Now, what's great is this is really, other than that other rotary one, this is the one that is ideal for cutting fabric. So great. It can take place of scissors. It can take the place of rotary cutters in some cases, not in all cases, obviously, because it can only be used on a straight line. But it's this really unique tool that is also a little bit safer. But be aware, that blade does, by popping down, it means you need to cut on a mat. You can't just scratch up your table. So keep that in mind. So that's the rotary ruler, often we call that. That segues nicely into this next portion. We're going to talk about rotary cutters. So rotary cutters, I've mentioned it before, are essentially razor sharp pizza cutters. These have a circular shaped blade that by pressing down and sliding, you can cut fabrics, you can cut papers. Generally, these are the tools of choice for quilters. And I'll tell you why. But as is the theme, rotary cutters on the top are very simple. They really have a blade. They have a handle you hold on to, and they have a safety feature. Now, the safety feature is because the secret, not really a secret, but rotary blades are the sharpest blades Fiskars makes, even sharper than craft knives. They are ridiculously sharp. They're difficult, not difficult, but even in the factory, they have to take measures to make sure they don't touch each other so that they don't get any nicks. Those blades are so sharp that a common consumer issue is they're scared of changing the blades. They're scared of being near them. They all need to have a safety feature built in. But blades handle safety features like everything else. There's more complexity when you dig a layer deeper. You can have different sizes of blades. There are 3. We'll talk about those. Different kinds of handles, essentially 3 of those as well. And then 2 different ways to make these blades safe. So let's dig into a little bit of detail on that. Because before I get to that, because we can mix and match, you can get a variety of these rotary cutters. With a pair of scissors, some of that variety comes from function. I talked about being specific about a task, so we get a specific scissor for that. Rotary cutters all do very similar things. They're going to cut multiple layers of fabric, but there are some differences that require a variety. I mean, and some might be you just really like your rotary cutter to match your decor, so there's different colors. But others might be you work alongside someone who's left-handed and you're right-handed. Maybe you want something. We'll get to that. But by varying some of those features, we get a pretty decent sized variety of rotary cutters that exist in the market. Combining a blade, combining handle, and combining a safety feature. Specifically about the blade, I mentioned there are 3 sizes. The 3 different sizes are 28 millimeters, 45 millimeters, and 60 millimeters. So to get a scale of that, these are the 2. So compared to my hand, 60s, pretty big, 45 is kind of normal size, and then 28 is actually pretty small. So those 3 sizes are actually good for slightly different things. If you can imagine what happens when you're cutting, you're taking this blade and you are always cutting on a mat, and you're pushing it down into that mat. So it's slicing through whatever material you're cutting and then slicing down into the mat. Because it is now embedded in the mat, if you were to try and make a curve, if you go around a curve, the amount of length of blade that is embedded in the mat dictates how tight of a curve you can make. And the smaller the amount of blade in the mat, the tighter curve you can make. So a 28 millimeter blade is smaller, so it can make tight curves. So it can go around curves nicer. So, you could really, without stopping and restarting, you could go around maybe a half-inch radius curve. Maybe probably about a half-inch radius curve, just fine. So these 28 millimeter rotary cutters are great for those that are going to cut curves, really. Fabric garment patterns often have curves. So garment patterns, if you're going to pin it to a piece of fabric and then cut it out with a rotary cutter, you want a small blade like this, a 28 millimeter. On the flip side, 60 millimeters have a big blade, so they don't go around curves well. They're more like mainly intending for straight cuts. But what happens is with a smaller blade, sometimes if you have thick material or multiple layers of, say, batting, you're making a quilt. That's a lower layer fabric. Usually you've got an edge around the outside, then you've got batting, like a squishy batting, and then a couple layers of the pieced fabric. So there ends up being a big stack. The hub, the distance between the cutting edge of the blade and the orange hub is pretty small on a 28. And honestly, in a 45, it's a little bit bigger, but not much bigger. And that's where that 60 comes in. The 60 millimeter has a significantly more amount of distance between the orange and the cutting edge. So you can cut material that's a little bit thicker, and you can see that material. You don't have to squish it down. Now, problem is 28s, 60s, those are, because they don't do something as well, both of these are a little rarer on the market, maybe a little more expensive. The 45, I would say, is that, I'm going to call it the jack of all trades. It's the Goldilocks size. It does curves fine. It does straight lines great. It's got a decent amount of space for you to be able to see the material. But again, it doesn't do super tight curves. And maybe if you've got extra thick stuff, like with an inch of batting or something, you might have trouble cutting with that. So because these are that Goldilocks, they're the most common in the market, they also come in multi-packs. So they end up being the least expensive of the different types. So those are kind of the three different sizes of blades. And because of that, we've got three different sizes of handles. Speaking of handles, primarily the differences between these have to do with ergonomics. The first of those types are the ones I've been showing. They are what we're called straight or stick rotary cutters. These are intended to be kind of the most simple and straightforward. It's symmetric about the center line. So when you open the blade, you can use it with your right hand. If you're ambidextrous, you can use it with your right hand and then just flip it over and use it with your left hand. If you're working with someone alongside where you're both using the same rotary cutter and one of you is right and one of you is left-handed, this would be the tool that does both you and them, and will have no difference between them. But there's a downside to it, and that has to do with your angle of your wrist when you're using it. Now, because get that out of the way, because you have to engage the blade, you have to turn your wrist, you have to adduct your wrist. This is, when you're pushing down with your abducted wrist, it's often going to cause some, it's not carpal tunnel, but just injuries because of that wrist flexion. You don't necessarily want that all the time. It can be fine for most people, but some people that it would be harder for them. So enter the second kind. This is called what we call the bent. These have an angle to them. The blade comes off at an angle from where the handle is. And by doing that, we now can use the blade without tilting your wrist as far because it's already pointing down. So the blade pointing down means now I can hold my wrist at a much more neutral angle. And that neutral angle means I'm not kind of overextending it. There's a downside with the bent, though. And now, if I'm imagining I want to look at the fabric that I'm cutting, I want the blade on this side. And it's bent down, so I have it along the right-hand side. I can always see it. But now if I hand it to someone who's going to use it left-handed, they're standing, and now the blade is on the back of the tool. And that doesn't really work, especially if they're cutting along a ruler. That ruler is on the far side of the thing. So really, this tool cannot be flipped ambidextrously without a change. Now, all of these rotary cutters these bent ones can be flipped to the other side. So by taking a little screw out and flipping it over, you can make it now a left-handed bent rotary cutter. And it's no different. But again, now it's great for a lefty, and it's not good for a righty. So the idea behind this is the bent is great for that wrist, but in some situations, it won't be exactly what you're looking for. So additionally, there are two other styles. There is we also call it, there's a trigger one where you can squeeze the trigger to get the blade to come out, and the other that, has, well, no, I guess the bent and the looper, this time. So these are essentially the two kinds. There are different ways to keep the blade safe, and I was about to talk about it with the bent, so I didn't want to spoil it, so we'll talk about it here. There's two fundamental different ways. The first is to have a guard that is extended over the blade that moves. That is the stick, for instance. The stick version has a guard, and you can see the orange here. That orange is protecting the blade. So the blade is held completely behind that orange plate. In order to use it, you slide the guard. So that guard, it gets essentially pulled up inside the white part and extends and reveals the blade. The blade doesn't move. So the blade is securely attached to the handle. It doesn't slide around, and it's just the guard that slides. There is a downside to this, and this is that it takes a physical action to make it safe. You have to think about it. You have to push it forward until it clicks. That may be something that, if I'm lazy, I'm just going to set it down. Well, now it's not safe. So we have a different kind. The second kind of making the way safe is actually having the blade move. And there's two versions of this, and they appear in the bent or in the trigger. And zooming in here, what happens here is I'm going to push this button in the back. If I hold it really steady, you can see the blade is sliding forward. The blade and the orange hub slide forward to expose the blade. That in itself is still an action to make it usable, but to make it safe, there's a button, and you just push it. Super simple. So it's a lot easier to just automatically push the button as you're setting it down. So a lot of people think that this feels safer. It's a preference thing, but some people say this feels safer. The downside to it is moving that blade means this blade is not physically quite as attached to the handle. We did a really good job, honestly, of making it feel like it's physically attached, but some people don't prefer that. So we do have this, we can go even further. And the trigger version, as you squeeze the trigger, it just moves the blade out. You can see that the blade is on a moving arm. And by squeezing the trigger, you can now cut, use it, and then just taking your hand off makes it safe. Here now you can't touch the blade because it's been pulled back. And as soon as you pick it up, you can do it. Now, what's nice is it has a lock, so you can actually lock it open if you don't want to keep it popping open. You can also lock it closed. So now no amount of action will let you accidentally expose that blade. So that's also a handy way to do it. So this moving blade or the moving guard are two different ways. Now, most of these things, and I've kind of mentioned them, especially the handle and the safeties, those are preferences. They're just kind of what people prefer. So we can mix and match by just saying, all right, what's right for you? What's the right blade? What's the right handle? What's the right safety feature? So little quiz here. If you want a 28 millimeter blade with a stick handle and a moving guard. Do you see it up there? And there it is. So we do have that. So we have a 28, a stick, and a moving guard. Well, let's say we want to cut something longer with thicker material, but we're going to stay straight. So we want I revealed it. I spoiled it. Sorry. 60 millimeter with a stick with a moving guard is there as well. But maybe you say you want something that's a 45 millimeter that's got a bent handle, maybe a loop handle with a moving blade. Well, yeah, there's a bigger variety there because some have soft grips that are a little more expensive. Some are color coordinated. We've got that version. We've got some purple. There's a couple other versions as well. So those are all really handy. We have the variety of tools that people prefer. But that's why there's a variety, because people prefer different things and there's different features you can play with. In the last couple of years, we did launch a new mechanism built into the more premium versions of our rotary cutters that addresses a consumer need that is constantly been there since rotary cutters were invented for paper and fabric cutting in the 80s. And that has to do with that razor sharp blade and doing blade changes. So our blades do last a long time, but they are so sharp and they have such high requirements from the consumers that they do eventually get dull. And you might say, if you're going to make a queen size quilt, you might go through a couple blades, maybe 2 or 3 over the entire quilt. But that's, lots of hours, tens, dozens of hours of use. So when it comes to changing the blade, how do you get them off without cutting yourself? And we invented what's called the easy blade change technology. And they appear in, you can see them up there, the 3 different versions. They are the ones with the soft grip. They're kind of the more premium versions of a rotary cutter. Let me demonstrate one of these things because they're really cool. The way they work is they include a special hub. This special hub has, actually, let me zoom into this one. This special hub has a handle, a little flap. It flips out. It's normally clicked in place, but you can flip it out. And built into this hub is not the screw on the back. It's actually, you push it and do a quarter turn, and a magnet pulls the blade out. And so now that blade is being held onto the hub, onto the pokey stick here. And when you go to want to dispose of it, you could take a piece of paper, piece of cardboard. Different people have different ideas on how to do it, but by pressing straight down, the magnet releases. And so now you can tape it to cards or stock or whatever and dispose of it the way you want, but you still haven't touched the blade. So that's great. But what happens now when you want to put a new blade on? Well, we've designed a solution for that as well. Here, our rotary cutters, these replacement blades, come in a special package. This is a 5-pack. These have multiple layers. The top one is a cover. And what happens, I'm going to take off see if I can get it. Maybe I do it. Yeah, I think I do it this way. I'm trying to remember. The oil makes them stick. So it's not working quite as perfectly as I had hoped. Oh, sure, that could work. So this cover pulls just the one straight out. And once you have this hub loose, you want to put that blade on here without touching it. The way you do it, these covers have a hole through the center. So you can put the thing straight on it, and that magnet holds it out. And now you can just reinsert it into your blade, and you've done the whole switch over without ever having to touch the blade. So very cool. And now you've got the others ready to go because you've got multiple little layers of those covers. And you can store the other 4 in there and be ready for the next time you need to change it. So very handy, very cool when it comes to those easy blade change rotaries. There's one other tool that uses the easy blade change but has another feature, and that's the one that's the 60 millimeter up there. That has a 60 millimeter easy blade change, but it's got something else going on. And that has to do with the fact that it has 2 holes in the hub. You might wonder what that's for. And the reason for that is this is called the duo loop. The dual loop is a 60 millimeter rotary cutter that has an easy blade change, so it pops right off like this, but it comes with a separate case that includes, if I can get it open one-handed, should have opened it first, there we go. It includes a separate 45 millimeter blade. Now the reason it has a 45 is because you can insert this in the other hole, and now you have a 45 millimeter blade that can go around tighter curves. So that is kind of a cool feature for those that might want to switch between a 45 and a 60. They use the standard size 45 and 60, but they just comes with 2 hubs, one for the 45 and one for the 60, and you put them in the 2 different holes in the dual loop, and you can use both. So very, very cool new feature. That dual loop is new even within the last couple of years. Okay, pivoting a little bit from cutting to a companion tool. Because every rotary cutter, I mentioned this before, needs to be cut on a mat, and most rotary cutters are cut along the edge of a ruler. Usually it's one of these quilting rulers. So there's a wide variety of rulers. So here is just a selection of those rulers. There's several different reasons to have so many different types, and not just different sizes, but they each have different features. Some of them have a different kind of marking. I'm pointing out some of these. You can see these have an orange edge along them. Those are seam allowances. When you are making a fabric pattern or you're cutting out quilt squares, you're always going to stitch those together at an edge. So if you want something that is 6 inches by 6 inches, before stitch or after stitching, you actually have to cut the fabric a little bit wider. So this orange edge makes the measurement a little bit more. It adds the proper amount of seam allocation. So it allows for extra seam. The downside to that is this can be confusing for people that don't use seam allowances. Because, for instance, this is an 8 by 8 ruler. We call it an 8 by 8, and you look at the measurements, and it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, that must be 8. But this is actually 8.5 by 8.5 because of that extra seam allowance. So you might forget that and think it's 8, and oops, or this one being 6, oops, it's actually 6.5. So we do make a variety of other rulers, which are typically sold for paper crafting, that do not have that edge that is extra. So that's what's called seam allowance, with or without. Also, some of them have angle markings built right in. So if you're going to cut a 45-degree angle or a 30 or a 60, they're built right into it, so you can cut those out. Alongside rulers, we also have cutting mats. These cutting mats come in a variety of sizes, mainly just 4. There's like a smaller 12 by 12. There's a 12 by 18, which is actually mostly the most popular size because it's most portable, easy to move around. And then they do get bigger, 18 by 24, and 24 by 36. There are different types of these. You can see here I'm talking standard. And then over there is an eco-friendly. It's getting a little dated because this eco-friendly launched maybe 7 years ago. The idea behind it is making them fully recyclable. Our typical standard, what we call self-healing, is made of PVC. PVC is a great material because while no plastic actually self-heals after a cut, PVC is really good at pushing itself closed again. So you can't see the cut that you made. And fundamentally, you didn't cut a notch. You just kind of closed it back up. So this self-healing really requires that PVC. When we went to eco-friendly, we used a different type of plastic, a fully recyclable one, polypropylene, but it didn't self-heal as nicely, or it just didn't close up as nicely. So it wore out a little faster. So really, almost everyone has moved away from those eco-friendly versions because as much as we want to make something that's recyclable, we also need them to function the way we purchase them for. And these last a long time. So most of the time, you can get away with just a PVC self-healing, and you've got 2 sides. So those are nice to use as well. There is a third type, and those are rotating. Those are a little more specific. There's an 8 by 8 and a 14 by 14. And the idea is if you're going to cut out a geometric polygon, you can not have to pick up your fabric and rotate it. You can just rotate the mat. A little more specific, but it does exist. Because some of these mats are really big, and people do like to quilt in different places. Sometimes they have to quilt on the kitchen table because they don't have dedicated space for it. There was a need for folding cutting mats. So we designed 2 different sizes of these cutting mats that fold down to half or fold down to a third. So this is a full 18 by 24 mat, one of the bigger sizes that folds in half, just to a 12 by 18, which is nice. And then there's one that's the largest size, the 24 by 36, that folds into thirds down to a 12 by 24. Much more manageable. There's a couple interesting features that we had to add to it. The first being the edges actually are wavy. They are not a straight bend. They're a scalloped edge. And the reason for that is if you can imagine, if you're cutting a straight line along it and it's slightly parallel to a straight cut edge, then you might fall into the crack, either slice the pieces apart or even just drift off of what you were trying to cut. You don't want that. So this wavy edge means you'll never follow the track of the cut just because you'll go kind of past it. Additionally, because these fold, they have an inside and an outside, so they're not double-sided like the others. But there is a common issue with mats that slide around because they're plastic and they're smooth. They might slide around on your table. You might not like that when you're using it. So we did put a non-slip foam on the inside of this. So some cool features that went along with it. In addition, there are two other kinds of mats that Fiskars makes that are not cutting mats. There's one that's called a silicone mat. That is the silicone craft mat. That's a very flexible, I don't have one in front of me here, very flexible, heat-resistant mat. One that you can drip hot glue on. You can have a soldering iron nearby. Things that are handy for other types of crafting, not necessarily quilting. And then we have a glass crafting mat. It's very similar, but it's made of glass. It's transparent. And it's also going to be a little bit heat resistant. Again, don't put an iron on it, but you can maybe drip hot glue on it. And it's just a very, very smooth surface that you can work on. But there are some tips and tricks with those three different types of mats. And the first is our PVC mats. You should not iron on them. Really, they should stay at room temperature as much as possible. Because there are actually several layers of different types of plastic, of different grades of PVC. If you heat one side of it, they will warp. And if you have a non-flat mat, that's really not good. So if you leave them in your window in your car when it gets hot and you get the radiant heating doing greenhouse things, it'll warp. Don't iron on it. Don't put it in your car. Keep it room temperature. The silicone mat I mentioned, you shouldn't cut on it. Silicone is very susceptible to using, when you have a razor, it'll kind of slice through that. So avoid cutting on it. In fact, for a while, we had a cutting mat that had a square of silicone. The idea being you can put a hot glue gun over it. And that makes a lot of sense. But we did have some issues with people that would slice through the silicone part because they're just, blindly following along their cut edge and oops. And then thirdly, don't cut a glass cutting mat. A glass crafting mat. It's not a cutting mat. Kitchen, you might see cutting mats made of glass. I'm really surprised those exist. When we did some testing of our rotary cutters and how long they last on a mat, we would put it in a robot that would cut over and over and over. And we would say how many hundreds or how many thousands of cycles would it get before that rotary blade is considered dull. Well, cutting mat, it was great. When we tested the glass mat, it was like 5 cuts, and then it was dull. Not even like 500 or 5,000. It was 5 cuts, and that blade was considered dull. So glass is really hard. It's very easy to mess up the edge of a rotary blade. So don't cut on a glass mat. Okay, I've talked in the cutting side. I've talked about scissors. We talked about trimmers. We talked about rotary cutters. And so now let's talk about paper crafting knives and fabric crafting knives too. It's a little bit in there, but mostly paper crafting knives. There are really 4 technologies that are used for these paper crafting knives, basically 4 types of knives. The first is what we call the snap-off knives. And you've probably seen them. They're generally considered more of a utility tool. They're more of hardware, but they're also great for just overall using a good sharp knife. And the fact that you can snap off the edge means you can get a new clean edge whenever you want. So it comes in 2 sizes. There's a 9mm and an 18mm width of the blade. They're great general use blades. Oh, here, I do want to zoom in here because this has got a cool feature. Most people don't know this, especially from packaging. Here, let's do this. Say you're cutting and you're using a new fresh edge, and that edge gets dull, so you snap it off and you throw it away. And then you have to extend it a little bit further, and so now you get a new cutting edge, and you snap it off, and then you throw it away. And eventually, even though this does have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 edges, you'll eventually get to the end where it's done. These don't exist all the way out because we've already snapped them off. But what do you do with that? Well, in that case, you actually push forward a little further and grab the last stub and pull it out. And this is where the magic happens. As you return the carriage sliding it all the way back, maybe you can get a hint of it if I can shine it right. And now when you slide forward, there's a new blade in there. There's actually 5 blades automatically loaded inside here that you just pull it back and pull it forward, and it pulls out a new one. So really, you've got 40 new cutting edges. And so these are really great. You can manually load new ones if you decide there are replacement packs we can buy. You can load 5 new ones in there. But you don't have to stop what you're doing when you take out that last blade. When you add the next, you want the next edge, you just slide it back and slide it forward, and a new one comes out. So that's a kind of a hidden feature in both versions of our snap-off knives. Another type of knife is our precision knives. Those you might have heard of them called X-Acto knives. Hey, they're craft knives. They're number 11 blades. You can call them other things other than the brand. We don't want to create that brand recognition, but these are type A size blades. That type A dictates how wide the base is. So there's a couple different versions of that same type A base. There's number 11s, number 13s. It just basically has a difference of the different shapes. You can kind of see them right there. Different shapes, but they all fit into those precision blades. And then there's also heavy-duty blades. Those are type B sizes. They're a wider base, so they fit into different handles. And again, they have a variety. Those are great also for carving wood because they're heavier duty. They're thicker. Sometimes they even have saw blades built into them. You can see there's a variety there. But they fit into a different size handle. And then finally, there are these fingertip blades, which I can demonstrate. And in fact, fingertip is a little bit weird because it's more the handle shape, because they have one version has a precision style. Let me zoom in here. This fingertip knife uses the same number 11 blades, but it's the precision. Now, the reason this is called fingertip is it's got this loop in the front. And when it's angled up like this, you put your finger through it. And now, when you're gripping it, it's the perfect pencil grip that is going to give you the most control, but also you don't have to hold it all the time. So that pencil grip, you can flip it back, do things with your hands, flip it back forward, and use it as that pencil grip. Now, I do have this one classified as a different blade because this other version of the fingertip actually has a different blade. It's very small. It's hard to see. This is a swivel drag knife. There's a very small blade on the tip, but it's it can spin around. So the idea is you can actually drag across a zigzaggy surface with this high precision of the fingertip, of the pencil grip, and that blade will swivel along with it, and it'll cut out a fancy shape. So for instance, you can make a swirly shape that you really couldn't do with a typical blade very easily. You'd have to be rolling your arm way around. So that swivel blade in that fingertip knife is pretty great and pretty unique. So that's that fourth type, is that fingertip or even that swivel blade. Excuse me. When it comes to like examples in our portfolio, I mentioned we've got a 9 and an 18 of the snap-off and replacement blades. For both the precision blades and the heavy-duty blades, I'll talk about them in the next slide, but we have unique handles that can accommodate those blades and make the changing of the blades very easy. We'll get to that in the next slide. But then again, the fingertip, I pointed at the 2, and then we do have a replacement fingertip swivel knife. So I mentioned easy blade change. So this is a new cool tool. So an easy change knife sets utilize a cool clamping feature so that if you've ever used normal craft knives, often you have to spin a screw at the end in order to get these off. These do not have that. In fact, let me zoom in here. This blade is so simple to change. This is the normal blade. All you do is you pull back on the handle and drop it down, and now you've loosened the blade. So it doesn't require twisting. It means you can swap them very easily, and now it's locked in place. Another nice thing about this handle is it's not circular. It's got a flat top, and it's ergonomically shaped to improve that pencil grip, that control, kind of like the fingertip knife. But it can be held in other ways. So if you need to pry or do a heavier grip, you can do thumb on top. You can do fingers. So and it doesn't roll. which is really nice too. So that's a really neat thing. We also sell this nice set, the set that includes a variety of knife blades. So it includes a couple different versions of that straight number 11 craft knife. It's got some curved, more scalpel shaped, and it's got some that can do carving, where these are just flat that can get pushed in as cutting. Not to leave out heavy duty, we have heavy duty knife handle as well that's generally more round, but it has a flat face on it so that it can improve your grip. These heavy duty blades are typically used for more the power grip. So they're when you're going to be holding it like this and pushing, but it has the flat of this, and it's also not perfectly round. It's oval shaped, so it doesn't roll. But like the other, it has an easy blade change. This has a clamp feature down in the back. You pull it back, and then it unlocks the blade for you to remove. And like the other, we have a version of a set that includes several different knives. A couple of those, we call them number 2 knives, which look like those typical craft knives. A couple of the straight knives, and then even some wood saws. So if you're cutting like balsa or soft woods, some of these saws would be do a good job. Flat saw, keyhole saws, they're built into this case. And it's got a handy carrying plastic case that locks up, and if you have both, they look really good next to it. Anyway, yeah, so easy blade change. I've got those 2 different versions, standard set and then a heavy duty set. And there's one other set that utilizes the same handle, which is actually shown in the big picture, because that's a weird thing. What's someone doing with that fabric? And that is a fabric set that includes a cutting blade. It includes a buttonhole blade and a seam ripper. Starting with a seam ripper, that's what that person's doing in the photo. They're actually cutting out old bad stitches from a sewing machine that maybe they're repurposing the material, or maybe they made a mistake, but it's got a curved blade that you can just get in there and cut just the stitches and not the fabric. And then the buttonhole blade is just the perfect width. If you've ever used a sewing machine to stitch a buttonhole, it just goes back and forth and makes the right shape around for the buttonhole, but it doesn't do the cutting. So you have to cut right in between those stitchings, and this buttonhole slicer is the perfect shape for you to just go in there and push through, and it makes the perfect width buttonhole. So some cool sets that you can get that utilize this easy blade change. So some additional cool tools that I've alluded to a few times. One being, I mentioned this package opener. So this package opener is a tool that I say it's great for using before you're giving a gift and after you're giving a gift, because it can be used to cut wrapping paper fine, it can cut gift tags, but then afterward you can use it to cut open annoying clamshell packaging. And built into it is a small screwdriver. You can see it in the middle there. That screwdriver is meant for opening battery compartments. It's both a Phillip, and you can flip it around and make it a standard, minus, plus. And so that just is held in there, so you always have a screwdriver on hand when you're opening those kids' toys in the clamshell packaging. And thankfully I can say these scissors do not come packaged in clamshells themselves. They are an easy open kind of paper packaging. Similarly, at the beginning, even a little before, when you're doing wrapping, we do have a gift wrap cutter. This you've probably seen with when you have the thin gift wrap, you can just slice right along, and it makes a very clean, easy cut just by pushing it through. Often these are kind of sold as sets. So it's kind of that last cool tool I want to talk about. Okay, one last slide is about blade sharpening. I get a lot of questions about, how do I sharpen my blades? And the first thing I ask them, what kind of blade? Is it a rotary cutter blade or is it a scissor blade? If it's a rotary cutter blade, I can honestly say that blade sharpening is not worth it. In fact, it's not worth the money or the danger, mainly because I've never found a successful blade sharpener for rotary cutters. I mentioned they're like the sharpest blades, and our factories have to take precautions to make sure they stay sharp while they're moving them around and packaging them. So the idea that a aftermarket product can take those razor sharp blades and make them sharper or return them to sharpness, it seems suspect. But we've got 2 versions that are on the market that Fiskars does not sell. They're not Fiskars tools, but they supposedly sharpen. We did test them both. Neither of them did anything except make them worse. So I wouldn't recommend those. But when it comes to scissor blades, yes, we can sharpen. And we have two options for that. Now, firstly, caveat, you will never get it back to factory sharpness. But if you have a blade that's, say, at 60% useful, a sharpener can bring it back to 90. But you do have to be aware, thinking back to the different styles of blades. Remember, there's the standard edge and the razor edge. So if you've seen in the past I know I have it, there it is, the small ceramic rod sharpener. So this is a tool, it's very inexpensive, that can do good jobs for sharpening your scissors, putting a new edge on them, for instance. So if I find my orange-handled scissor, the way that this works is you hold the scissor in your dominant hand, in your right hand, and the tool in your left. And the way I like to do it is pinch just the tip right along the white ceramic rod. And then while squeezing the tool, you use your other hand to slide the ceramic rod, slide it backwards towards the joint. Now it will force the blades to open. You can, in theory, try to do it the other way, squeezing the blades, but often it gets stuck and doesn't work as well. So I always recommend this solution. Doing that, we'll put a new edge. You can even feel it as you make that last cut. It self-sharpens it a little bit. It cuts that new edge right on there. And it really can help improve the life of an older pair of scissors. You might ask, how does it work with a left-handed scissor? Left-handed scissors have blades that are on the opposite side. Well, thankfully, if you're a lefty, you hold with your left hand and you use the tool with your right hand. So you've now flipped the orientation of the sharpener. So you do it in exactly the same way. There's no difference when you're using it with a left-handed tool than with a right. So this is really handy for when you have a standard edged blade. So these are for these standard edges. If you have a razor edge scissor, and those are these fabric ones, which with the orange soft grip mean they're razor edge, as well as they say razor edge on there, you should not use this. If you try, you will take that 45-degree grind angle and try and shape it to a 30. You're going to make it duller. So we have what's called the universal scissor sharpener. This has the same concept where there's a ceramic rod through here, but it's not just one. This actually has two ceramic rod, little faces, that are on springs. And so they will automatically set the angle of the blades so that when you use this tool in that same way, you slide it up, it'll work with razor edge and it will work with the standard edge. So really handy tool to have around because you can't mess it up. You can't accidentally forget and ruin your pair of razor edge scissors because you've sharpened it with the wrong tool. So that universal scissor sharpener will really get around any of that issues. So, okay, with that, I think this was a great hour plus, but I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something, and I will leave you with my email right there, dan.cunningham@fiskars.com. When you have questions, I'm happy to field them. In fact, I would say on a weekly basis, I'm getting a call about some technology from a salesperson or from a product manager or from someone in sourcing. Hey, can you help remind me about what's the difference between this scissor and that, or what's the difference between these other things? So I am happy to get those emails. Usually they're very quick, right off the top of my head. Been around for 15 years, so I've seen most everything. But feel free and contact me. And if you're interested in more content like this, I have other tool schools available for you to watch that are recorded. Or if you have a special event, I'm happy to do live, either live streamed or live in person when there's a special thing happening, like if you've got a meeting with a buyer and you want to talk technology, I'm happy to be that tech guy. So thank you very much for the watching again, and have a great day. Thanks.